Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The war, which began almost 22 months ago with the horrific massacre at the hands of the Islamist Hamas, is now seemingly stuck in attrition mode, and the world's attention is focused on the humanitarian crisis being suffered by some 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, or so the Islamist Hamas claims. Israel denies any intention to starve the Gazan population and insists that reports on hunger and malnutrition are grossly exaggerated. However, external pressure has eventually forced Israel to pause her military operations for a time while opening trucks corridors into distribution sites and conducting airdrops. This may be helping somewhat to alleviate the suffering, but at the same time, it also prolongs the wait for hostage release deal as negotiations in Qatar have paused for consultations in the relevant capitals involved. So, where is the war headed, and is there any resolution in sight? Joining us to discuss this matter, all the way from Central Israel, is Brigadier General in Reserve Dr. Amnon Sofrin, who formerly served as the Chief of the Intelligence Directorate at the Mossad, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate as well. It's great to see you, General.
Good to be here.
Also joining us is Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Cooper-Vassel, formerly the Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, as well as the head of the IDF Intelligence Directorate's Research and Assessment Division, among a long list of other positions, including currently the President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. It's great to see you, sir.
My pleasure to be with you.
And last but not least, our TV7 Editor-at-Large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, since October 7th, we've discussed this topic day in and day out. Of course, 50 Israelis, some dual nationals, are still in Hamas captivity to date, with at least or up to 20 of them among the living, per the latest reporting. And yet, it seems that from this perspective, it seems that the Islamist Hamas is not interested in reaching an accommodation, and according to the latest statements coming out of the White House, Iran was behind the latest ploy to frustrate any type of breakthrough that would have brought about the release of at least half of the Israeli hostages in Gaza. Give us a little bit of an understanding. Where are we currently in this context, and what is the main objective, as was presented by Jerusalem, of the war as we speak?
So you are very right to use the term or the verb frustrate, because this is the overriding feeling in Israel as well as in Washington, frustration. Because what the Israeli government ordered the IDF to do a few months ago was to launch a new campaign intended to take over some 75% of the Gaza Strip's territory, and hopefully bring about a new deal in the wake of the first deal of this particular year, which was aborted after its first phase. But this right now has been overtaken by events, especially since world media and world leaders and diplomats are focused on what they at least interpret as the view from Gaza of hunger, starvation, whether intended or not, it doesn't matter. This is what motivates them. There is pressure on President Trump. He, of course, reflects it in his statements, which may not be consistent, but they do show that he has grown tired of what has happened at Doha in the negotiations. So Israel is now at the crossroads, both because of internal debates as well as the relationship between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Trump. And it has to make a decision soon whether it is committing more military power or cuts a deal.
Well, General Kupilvasa, when we're talking about Israel's war objectives, we are, of course, highlighting the fact that Israel will never relent when it comes to allowing Hamas to remain in power in the Gaza Strip, degrading it both militarily as well as from a governing function position, something that it has been pursuing for quite some time. But yeah, it seems like at this point in time, at least, the goal of reaching such an accommodation has yet to really bear fruit, and the instructions that the Jerusalem cabinet has provided the IDF to bring about the conditions for such a reality have not really materialized. Why is that, and to what degree are we currently in a certain juncture in which, as Mr. Owen said, either cut a deal that is not going to fulfill your accommodated aspirations, or commit significantly more forces that will also potentially bring about a much more difficult reality in the other side of this equation?
Well, the complexity that we are experiencing now is primarily a product of the intention of Israel to have to eat the cake and have it too. That's something that's impossible, as we all know. And we want to reach a situation in which we are going to convince Hamas to give up power in Gaza and release the hostages without taking over the Gaza Strip and pulling it out from Hamas control. That's Hamas is not going to cooperate with this idea. And that's why they refuse to accept the deal that was presented to them. Because for them, the most important thing is to be in a position where they can say that the 7th of October was the right thing to do. And that in order to be able to say so, they would have to stay in power in Gaza and make sure that they are not disarmed. And that's why they refuse to accept the idea that Israel is going to keep fighting against them once the ceasefire is going to be over, and unless they accept the idea that they have to be disarmed. And this is where we are stuck. Now, we keep convincing ourselves that if we put more pressure on Hamas without taking over the control of the population, without taking over the control of 100% of the territory, we shall be able to convince them that, look, it's good for you to leave Gaza and to be disarmed. Look at what terrible damage has been done to Gaza because of your insistence on staying in power. And but this logic is a very Israeli and Western logic. Doesn't apply to Hamas. They think differently. And the fact is that as long as we are trying to convince ourselves that it's possible to convince Hamas to give up the control of Gaza without taking over the control over the population and over the rest of the territory, we are going to be stuck where we are today. And we have actually three options. One is to continue what we're doing today. That would lead probably to the same results, because we have not totally defeated Hamas. We caused Hamas an enormous damage, but didn't defeat it yet. And we have not created yet the conditions to release the hostages. And if we continue this way, I'm not sure that this is going to happen. The other option is to accept Hamas conditions and make sure that we have the hostages back and give up the idea of removing Hamas from power. And the other option is to take over the rest of the territory and to remove Hamas from power. This is the third option. We have to decide. What we are doing until now is refraining from decision, deciding not to decide, convincing ourselves that if we don't decide and keep doing the same thing, the result is going to be different. This is not going to be different, unfortunately.
Thank you, General Kupilvasa. General Sofyan, I'd like to divert the next question to you. When we're talking about the complexities within the context, also of what General Kupilvasa just mentioned, but beyond that, there is much pressure in adjacent countries, be it Jordan, be it Egypt, including, of course, in Qatar, which is a patron of the Islamist Hamas alongside the Turks, to find a resolution to the issue, since from their perspective, as long as this conflict in Gaza continues, it's only going to get harder for them to find a certain resolution in their own domestic streets. The various challenges for those totalitarian regimes is naturally one of regime stability. And yet, it seems that they have a hard time to explain it to their own civilians, particularly when there is so much heat against Israel.
I think that we should differ between Jordan and Egypt on one side and Qatar on the other hand. Regarding Jordan and even Egypt, I think that the main concern is that the refugees from Gaza will begin to fled either to Sinai Peninsula or to the other side to Jordan. And this is the main concern of these countries. First of all, I'm sure about Egypt because this is the situation in Egypt. Egypt is terrified from the idea that people will begin flooding from Rafah area into Sinai Peninsula and begin to establish some footholds on the ground right there under the Egyptian regime, and they create a new atmosphere and a new problem and a new challenge to the Egyptians. That's one. The second issue is regarding Jordan. Jordan is mainly consisting on what we call Palestinian population, which is about more than 50%. Some people even tend to say 65 to 70% of the population. And therefore, of course, they identify with Hamas because they are brothers. They are Sunnis like just Hamas. And they don't want Hamas to be destroyed and demolished. And they are applying a lot of pressure on the government and on the regime. And King Abdullah is also, of course, under full pressure because on one hand, he doesn't want the people inside Jordan to begin creating some instability. On the other hand, he doesn't want people from Gaza to begin flooding into Jordan. And of course, it doesn't want on the other hand, to demonstrate that it is cooperating with Israel and have good relations with Israel because the people in Jordan doesn't like it or don't like it. Regarding Qatar, Qatar is another story because Qatar has what we call, it sees himself as what we call the main negotiator and the main mediator between Hamas and between Israel. And of course, they want to have good relations with the Americans. And therefore, they invest a lot of efforts in order to get to some agreement together with the Egyptians. Each one has its own, of course, interests. But nevertheless, Qatar is very disappointed that they apply a lot of pressure on Hamas leadership in Qatar, which is located in Doha, to get into some agreement with Israel that in the end will enable to solve this problem. And by that, to gain sympathy coming out from the American administration to Qatar as well.
It's important to point out that, of course, Qatar is a lot more warm towards the whole Muslim Brotherhood equation, alongside Turkey these days under the AKP party, which is, in essence, an Islamist faction. But at the same time, during the course of the past year alone, we saw the Jordanian monarchy coming out and banning the Muslim Brotherhood, which the Islamist Hamas is, of course, an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. And for Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood is enemy number one. So they are, of course, very much vigorously fighting against the Muslim Brotherhood. The intelligence community there, the Muhabarat, so to speak, is working very hard against those elements. And you have hundreds of thousands of incarcerated members of the Muslim Brotherhoods in Egypt, something that, of course, is not overly amplified these days for PR reasons, but nonetheless, they are in a vigorous battle for their own survival, regime survival at that. But Mr. Owen, Israel has permitted both the UAE as well as Egypt and Jordan to conduct airdrops.
As well as its own efforts.
Correct. But is this part of the equation also to help them improve the image, so to speak, of those two countries?
Yes, but this is marginal. And you know, when you look at our planet from space or from the moon, it is reported that the only man-made structure visible is the Great Wall of China. So if you look at what is happening in the Middle East, from a very simplistic perspective, it's Israel vis-a-vis Hamas. But within each player, there are also problems and interests and tugs of war between the military wing or the terrorist wing of Hamas and the political wing, those who are inside Gaza and those who are negotiating in Doha on their behalf, but they are not always on the same page. And in Israel too, the cabinet is divided. And President Trump, it's very interesting to read the transcript of a recent interview by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He was asked about Russia and Ukraine, but you could also read, instead of Putin, Netanyahu. He said that President Trump wants his associates to be able to bridge 95% of the problem between two negotiators or parties, and he is a closer. He is going to close the remaining 5%. And he actually likes this part, according to Rubio. Now, if he is trying to close the final 5% in the deal between Israel and Hamas, he is frustrated because the Israeli government is threatened from within by ministers who say that if the deal is not to their liking, they will bring down the government. And then you won't have a deal. Mm-hmm. So what's the point of taking
this is a very
exercise?
Difficult situation, particularly with Ben Gvir and Smotrich, of course, being very vigorous in their demand to continue to the end, so to speak. They have not articulated what the end means from their perspective, but nonetheless, it is a very challenging situation to be in for Netanyahu in a coalition government that is not cohesive in its perspectives of the manner in which certain things need to take place. But nonetheless, albeit a challenge, we do see that both the Netanyahu government as well as Trump and his administration are very clear-eyed about the Islamist Hamas being responsible for failing to reach an accommodation, despite having laid out quite realistic, at least from the perspective of Israel and the United States,
up to a point, because
offers.
Because a one-off deal is still on the table.
Well, it's not a one-off deal. And a deal, again, going back to the point made, a deal that allows Hamas to stay in power is never on the table. That is what Hamas wants, but ultimately its survivability is not a question to be negotiated on. General Cooper-Vassel, how should we look at the current complexities of finding a so-called day after? Is there even room to discuss a day after in the current circumstances?
There is room to discuss day after, but we have to understand the day after is not going to come before we finish this day. And the way we are going to finish this day is going to have an enormous impact on the way the day after is going to look like. If the day after is going to be based on a situation where Hamas still stays in power, then we can imagine that it's going to be difficult to convince anybody to come and replace Hamas from the civilian point of view, while Hamas still controls the Gaza Strip from a military point of view. It's going to be, I don't think many people are going to volunteer. And if Hamas is going not to be there, is not going to be there, then it's going to be much easier to convince, first of all, Palestinians of all kinds, and secondly, other powers to take some responsibility for the future of Gaza. And but in order to make this happen, somebody has to convince Hamas to leave power, to be disarmed. And there's nobody who's able to do that but the IDF. And I don't imagine that Hamas is going to volunteer to do that. And that's why only once the IDF is going to take control, and it's going to stay there for a year or two to convince the Gazans that Hamas is out and is not coming back. Only then all kinds of ideas about the day after are going to be relevant to really be implemented. Everything that we hear today are nice ideas that may be implemented and feasible once the people of Gaza understand that Hamas is out and is not coming back. but not today. We are trying to move forward. We just wrote a piece in the Jerusalem Institute for Security, for Strategy and Security. We wrote a piece by Fasegal that said, why wait until everything is perfect? Let's start doing what we did with Yasser Abu Shabab in other areas of Gaza. It's a good idea, but there are not that many volunteers that want to go the way that Yasser Abu Shabab did. And if you find any, please let me know about them, because they may get Israeli support in order to establish some fifth dome in a certain part of Gaza.
Yes, but when we're talking about Yasser Abu Shabab, General, when we're talking specifically about Yasser Abu Shabab, a son of the Tarabin tribe, of course, that has the capacity, also the smuggling capacity, so to speak, to provide some backing. He has also the backing of Egyptian intelligence, among others. But one thing is quite interesting, that just this past week, he has announced that he has taken over the entirety of Eastern Rafah, and he has also the capacity to expand that territory, with many Gazans flocking to fill up the ranks of this organization that he has established. Is this not potentially a modus operandi for the expansion of his reign, so to speak, in other sectors rather than going to other clans?
It is, but his tribe, this clan is present in Eastern Rafah. That's where they are, not in northern Gaza. In the areas where this tribe is present, this can be expanded, but it's just small parts of Gaza. And yes, as I'm saying, that if we find some other people like Abu Shabab that are ready to take responsibility in other areas that we control, fine. But we have to understand, Hamas insists on that Israel will withdraw from the entire territory. If we are to reach an agreement about the hostages, eventually we are going to be asked to, maybe not in the first stage, but in the next stages, we shall be asked to withdraw from the territory. And once we withdraw from the territory and we leave Yasser Abu Shabab or whoever is going to be taking similar steps in the future to the mercy of Hamas, they have stronger capabilities than he has. So we have to understand how fragile the situation is. He's a brave man. That's nice, but his bravery is depending on us holding the borders that protect him, and that's why we insist that any withdrawal not include the areas in which he is in power. That complicates the situation even further. We have to understand how complicated the situation is. The idea that we should find a magic way out is nice to dream about it and to believe in it, but in reality, it's very difficult to be implemented.
Well, it's a complex situation. Of course, the fact of the matter is it is more of a Jomini type of philosophical approach within the context of the Machiavellian perspectives to the implementation, so to speak, of internal forces taking over. I think the IDF is much more comfortable with the Clausewitzian approaches. But nonetheless, General Kuperwasser, General Sofrin, I'd like to ask you, since the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, alongside the Republic of France, are joining forces in their intentions to recognize a Palestinian state. It does not conform with any terms or conditions necessary to make such a declaration, but apparently, recognizing something doesn't need to converge with reality.
First of all, the declaration came out only from President Macron, the French president. We didn't hear the Saudis yet declaring that declaration as well. It's been supporting to establish a new Palestinian state, an independent Palestinian state. By the way, only Macron was the sole person who made this declaration. He was condemned by many of his colleagues. The only one who a little bit identified with him was the Prime Minister of UK, who said that the Palestinians are entitled to have their own state, but not more than that. That means it doesn't have yet what we call some gravity area or gravity center that will enable somebody to try to take advantage of that and to promote the idea of establishing a government, what we call a sole Palestinian state, which is not, of course, it's not defined, does include only the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, does include Gaza as well. Nobody really got into the details. And this is what we call a general idea. But let's say that the general atmosphere is supporting more the Palestinians right now than Israel because of the pictures that you see from Gaza, coming up from Gaza. And they are doing a great job by demonstrating what is happening in Gaza. And even though some of the pictures are faked, nevertheless, it is, of course, demonstrating to the world that starvation and suffer and so on, of course, because of Israel. I can say surely that we failed with what they call all these centers of distribution of food and aid. It doesn't really work well, and we are being criticized by that as well, and therefore we are not in a very good situation regarding what we call the whole issue of what we call the world sympathy. But nevertheless, right now, let's say that nobody is really supporting and nobody is really going to lead some what we call actual acts in order to implement this Palestinian state.
Indeed. Well, I think Israel failed in one factor, and that is explaining itself, public relations. It has done an abysmal job. Of course, the tools at the disposal of Israel's adversaries are far greater, since the impact of the disinformation spouted out by totalitarian regimes in Western societies is not something that Western societies have the tools to contend with themselves in an ongoing legal issue of anyways, we'll have to discuss this at length at another discussion of Jerusalem Studio. I'd like to immediately thank General Cooper-Wasser, General Dr. Amnon Sofrin, and Mr. Oren for all of your valuable insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.